I used to tell myself that good mothers know when to step back. When my daughter Iris Blake married Gavin Whitfield 5 years ago, I smiled through the lacquered spectacle of string quartets and ice sculptures and said nothing as she moved into the Whitfield estate instead of a small place with her new husband. I swallowed my doubts when Iris, once a fearless reporter who took on City Hall with a pen and a voice recorder, began declining assignments, then disappearing from bylines altogether. Boundaries, I reminded myself. Respect the life she chose. On Christmas Eve, the boundary snapped. Snow hammered the windshield as I followed a narrow road into a neighborhood of hedgerows and iron gates. The Whitfield's gate, usually shut like a blinking red light, hung ajar. The mansion glowed the way an expensive lie glows warm from a distance, cold when you reach it. I was easing into the circular drive when a shape on the front walk made my heart hitch. Even through the blur of flurries, I knew my child by posture alone. Iris sat on the stone edging, bare-armed in a cocktail dress, no coat, no scarf, her skin raw with cold. I left the car running and sprinted, boots sliding on ice. Iris. Her lips were tinted that frightening winter blue. For a second, her gaze drifted past me, as if she were listening for permission from a person not present. Then her focus locked. Mom. I wrapped my coat around her shoulders and felt the shudder in her bones. How long, I asked, though I already feared the answer. An hour, she murmured. Maybe 2. The words were slow, softened by numbness. Why are you out here? Her glance flicked to the windows where silhouettes clustered under chandeliers. I questioned one of Lionel's plans at dinner, she said. Lionel Whitfield, Gavin's father, lord of the house. Gavin said I needed to reflect on my place before I could come back in. Rage and calculation fought a fast duel inside me. Rage lost not because it was wrong, but because calculation would get her warm. I guided her to the door, used the key still clenched in her fist, and brought her into an entry hall that smelled like cinnamon and old money. Music sighed from hidden speakers. Conversation died as we crossed the threshold. Gavin rose with the speed of a man who rehearses concern. Darling, he cooed. I was just going to check on you. She's half frozen, I said. She needs heat clothes, perhaps a doctor. Across the room, Lionel stood, silver hair sharpened to a blade by lamplight. Mrs. Blake, he said with the soft contempt of a man unused to being corrected. In this family, disrespect has consequences. The women on the sofas looked polished and distant, like decor that knew better than to speak. Consequences, I repeated, draping my coat tighter around my daughter. You left her in sub-zero wind as a lesson. Gavin's hand found Iris's shoulder with proprietary ease. Mom, you don't understand our dynamics, he began, voice smooth as lacquer. Iris and I will discuss this privately. I looked at my daughter, really looked. The bright, opinionated woman I raised flickered like a pilot light in a drafty room. I felt something old and steel-hard take its place in me. I straightened, met Lionel's eyes, and spoke 5 quiet words that changed the temperature of the house more than any storm outside. I know about Project Prometheus. The effect moved through the room like a pressure wave. Gavin's smile stalled. Lionel's color drained a shade. 2 Whitfield sons exchanged a glance that said briefed but unprepared. The wives looked up, startled, as if a painting had coughed. I did not elaborate. I did not need to names matter to men who hide things. We're leaving, I said, lifting Iris's bag from the console table where someone had placed it like a confiscated item. She will warm up and sleep. Tomorrow we can decide how to proceed. Lionel recovered first. You're making a scene on Christmas, he said. Paternal velvet wrapped around iron. This is a family matter. My daughter's health is my jurisdiction, I replied. And if you believe this house is the only place with traditions, you haven't met mine. Gavin reached out, but my Iris took one small step that placed her just beyond his reach. The room inhaled, no one exhaled. We crossed the marble, past a tree so symmetrical it looked printed. At the door, cold air reached in like an honest hand. I turned once, not to threaten, but to timestamp the moment. Prometheus. I repeated softly as if trying a key in a lock. Then I opened the door to the storm, gathered my daughter close, and stepped into the night that would carry us to whatever came next. By the time we reached the Harborview Inn, the storm had sanded the city down to quiet edges. I parked beneath the porte cochere, handed my keys to a bellman whose breath smoked in the air, and guided my daughter through the sliding doors into a lobby glowing with low lamps and evergreen garlands. The heat hit us like a wave. Iris's fingers, locked around the strap of her evening bag, stayed stiff a moment longer, and then began to sting circulation, returning pain, a promise that warmth was possible. Hot shower, I said, steering her toward the elevator. Then food. No discussions until you're warm enough to find your words. She nodded without argument, which told me more than her blue-tinged lips had. The Iris I knew would have pushed back on triage, insisted on making a plan while steam still hung in the air. This Iris was conserving energy like a diver counting remaining oxygen. In our suite, 2 rooms living area gas fireplace, they'd set a tray with a kettle and orange slices studded with cloves. Someone had a sense of hospitality. Iris disappeared into the bathroom. A minute later, I heard the shower come on a brittle gasp, then the long, low sound a body makes when it finally stops bracing against the cold. I ordered soup, bread, tea, and anything with ginger while the television in the corner played silent footage of snowplows. Only when I set down the phone did my hands shake. I gripped the back of a chair until the tremor passed. "You're doing it," I told myself out loud, because sometimes the only adult in the room needs to be addressed. "You're handling this now." Steam rolled from the bathroom when Iris emerged, wrapped in a white robe, cheeks flushed the way winter apple skins are. She took the mug I handed her and cupped it in both hands like a campfire. "Thank you," she said, and for a moment the word was the whole woman I remembered, warm, direct, not asking permission from anyone's eyes. We sat side by side in front of the fireplace with blankets pulled over our knees like conspirators in a nursing home. The tea loosened everything fingers jaw the rope of tension that had been hardwired into the line of her shoulders. "When did it start?" I asked, because naming a pattern is the beginning of breaking it. "After the wedding," she said. "Not all at once. That would have been easy to see. Gavin was attentive if you're watching from outside, helping me build a more sustainable schedule, suggesting I take time off after a brutal investigative series. You look tired became, you would be happier without that kind of work, became, the family prefers dinner at 7, journalism is never going to respect dinner at 7. She gave a small dry laugh. Disapproval wears a tuxedo in that house. "And Lionel never raises his voice," she said. "He delegates gravity. If he looks disappointed, everyone else supplies the volume." Iris stared into her mug as if it held a map. I started going to family dinners every night because it seemed easier than the conversation that followed if I didn't. I stopped seeing friends I couldn't bring into that orbit. The Whitfield women are curated. If you don't match the room changes you or ejects you. "And tonight, I asked if we had the right to displace 100 families for a skyline view," she said. Lionel called it a lesson in perspective. Gavin called it a lapse in loyalty. I was told to reflect on my place. She swallowed. "It used to be my favorite phrase as a journalist, find your place, speak from it." Somewhere between their walls, place became a leash. Room service knocked. I set bowls of broth and trays of sliced bread on the low table, the kind of food your grandmother makes when she needs to feed you and apologize at the same time. Iris ate slowly like a person returning to a country she used to live in. Color came back. Tears sat at the edges of her eyes but did not fall. "Listen to me," I said, when she set down her spoon. "What happened tonight was not discipline. It was cruelty, and cruelty is a system, not a single decision. I've known for years something was wrong. I told myself you were 32 and making choices, and that saying so out loud would push you away." Iris looked up, a glint of the reporter she'd been. "You knew." "I knew enough to look," I said. "When you got engaged, I did what any mother with a background in corporate risk should do. I looked into the Whitfield empire. There is a project codenamed Prometheus that funnels money through shells and payments dressed as consultancy fees. I hoped I would never have to unpack that box. I hoped love would be enough to build its own weather, but love doesn't melt every glacier." She took a breath that fluttered in her chest. "You kept it because you didn't think I would believe you. Because you were in love with a version of him I would have sounded jealous to question," I said. "And because I wanted you to find your own line. Tonight they drew it for you with a shovel in the snow." Iris set her hand over mine. "I want out," she said. Not a pause. Not a separation that invites negotiation. "I want out, Mom. Help me." The word was an altar and a lever. I stood because my body had already decided. We'll need 3 kinds of protection: legal, digital, and narrative. Legal to keep them away. Digital because control follows phones home like burrs on wool. Narrative because men like Lionel do not lose silently. They build a story about you to feed a hungry room. I dialed Sienna Park first. Sienna has a reputation in certain circles. If your husband thinks judges are decorations, she will disabuse him with footnotes. "Marion," she said after one ring, because people who work the right cases rarely sleep. I explained briefly the cold the phrase reflect on her place. Prometheus. "Emergency protective order," Sienna said. "We'll petition the on-call judge, document the hypothermia risk. Tomorrow morning we'll get Iris evaluated by a neutral forensic psychiatrist to preempt any claim of instability. Where are you?" I gave her the hotel and room number. "I can be there in 40 minutes, she said. "We'll draft declarations while the kettle is hot." Next, I called Max Chen, who I once hired to sterilize a multinational's servers after a very expensive intern plugged a free thumb drive into a boardroom dock. "If they've tracked her, we'll find it," he said. "I'll bring a clean kit. Don't answer any unknown links or calls until I get there. Lastly, I texted Jonah Hale Iris's former editor now at the Globe. Journalists remember who went missing from the bylines. He called me instead of replying. I never bought the sudden domestic bliss pivot, he said. What do you need? Not publication, I said. Not yet. Accountability and a witness. If they try to paint Iris as unstable having a reporter who has seen her steady matters, I'll come sit, he said. I'll also start a background file in case this turns into a story the city and your daughter needs. We had just finished when Iris's phone rattled the table. Then again, then relentlessly, like hail. She showed me the screen. Dozens of messages stacked Gavin in gray, Lionel in blue, numbers I did not recognize, paragraphs braided with that parlor tone that sounds like kindness until you parse the verbs. Iris's thumb hovered. I don't want to read them, she said. You don't have to, I told her. Silence is a sentence you're allowed to write. Max arrived first, a duffel bag slung crossbody snow melted into his hair. He worked like a surgeon, gentle with the patient, ruthless with the problem. He took Iris's phone, then her laptop, then the iPad she never used. 2 spyware packages piggybacking text and mic, he said within minutes, voice flat to keep me from throwing something. And her location is shared to 3 family Apple IDs. He glanced at Iris. You'll want a new number and a new account. For now, I'm going to put these devices in airplane mode, pull the SIM, and create a secure tunnel from my machine so they can ping the old breadcrumbs while you move without being watched. Iris's mouth parted in a small O. They were listening. Assume yes, Max said. Assume they built ritual around it. Sienna arrived a heartbeat later, dark hair pulled into a clean knot tote bag already open. She took Iris's statement like someone rescuing a bird from Hand's humane pace. She didn't flinch when Iris described the words used at dinner. She did, however, swear softly under her breath when Max showed her the shared location settings. This will help, she said. The law is finally learning to see coercive control as a form of abuse. We're going to ask for a temporary restraining order tonight. If the judge is who I hope it is, we'll have protection until a full hearing. Who's on call, I asked. Judge Albright, Sienna said. She likes facts better than theater. She looked at Iris. We'll also schedule a neutral psychological evaluation in the morning. Not because I doubt you, but because they will claim to. We'll preempt their script. Jonah came just as Sienna hit send on the petition. He looked like he'd run through the storm with his notebook open, which frankly he may have. Hey kid, he said to Iris using the newsroom tone that turns tough men soft. Iris half smiled. It was as much a reunion as a recognition. He listened. He took notes. He asked the kind of questions that tell you he's one of the good ones. Not voyeuristic, not skeptical for sport. Skeptical to draw a clean line. The hotel room became a war room. Max's laptop glowed on the coffee table, Sienna's documents lined up by the fireplace, Jonah in the armchair texting cross-checks to a research desk, because even at midnight on Christmas in a storm, there is always someone at a desk. At 11:07 p.m., the hotel room phone rang. I picked up. This is Officer Kaimani Walters with Boston PD. A voice said tired but courteous. We received a welfare call from Mr. Gavin Whitfield regarding his wife. He's expressed concern about her mental state. Officer Walters, I said, this is Marion Blake. Ms. Iris Blake is here with me of her own will. She is safe. Our attorney has just filed for a temporary restraining order after an incident at the Whitfield residence involving exposure to extreme cold as a punishment. Happy to have you send a unit to check, and we will provide documentation of the petition. He was quiet for a moment. Understood, ma'am. We'll stop by for a quick verification. If an order is granted tonight, please have a copy ready for our report. When I hung up, Iris let out a breath that had edges. He moved fast. They rely on speed, Sienna said. Surprise is a tactic when you believe the world is your home court. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later, sodden coats steaming as they stepped inside. They spoke to Iris kindly and separately recorded that she was lucid-oriented and had legal counsel. They asked if she feared for her safety if she returned to the Whitfields. No, she said, because I'm not returning. Copy that, Officer Walters said, and the record noted her decision in plain words that would be hard to spin later. When the door closed, the room fell into a hush, peculiar to the minutes between action and answer. Sienna watched her email like a cardiologist watches a monitor. Max sketched a rough map of our digital ecosystem on hotel stationery, what to burn, what to salvage, which bridges to blow. Jonah scrawled a list of names, zoning board, community development, campaign finance, oddities, churches, that have speeches by Lionel archived under family values. You've made friends, he said to me without looking up. I cultivated the kind of acquaintances that get you out of a burning building, I said. Turns out I needed them for something colder. At 12:03 a.m., Sienna's phone chimed. She read the message once a second time, then allowed herself the first full smile of the night. Granted, she said. Judge Albright issued a temporary order. No contact, no approach within 500 feet, no interference with Iris's access to personal documents or medical care. We have 10 days to appear for a full hearing. The clerk's office has already emailed the order to the Whitfield Council on record and to BPD. Iris covered her mouth with her hand, not to hide tears. There were none this time, but to steady her breath. Relief is its own weather system. It changed the air entirely. What now? She asked. Now we sleep, I said, because timing is as much strategy as any filing. In the morning, the evaluation with Dr. Mira Kapoor at 9. After that, Lieutenant Hannah Rivera from SVU will escort us to the house to retrieve your personal belongings. We take nothing we can't justify as yours. We do not argue. We let the law be the loudest person in the room. And Prometheus, Jonah asked, voice almost gentle on the myth. I looked at Iris because ownership matters. She nodded. Prometheus waits, I said, but he doesn't sleep. We'll use what we need when we need it. If the Whitfields try to drag Iris into their narrative grindhouse, we will set the truth on the record in a way that can't be pulped. Max closed his laptop and stretched. I'll set up a secure communication channel before I go, he said. 2 devices for you, Iris, clean phone, clean laptop. Do not log in with old credentials. We'll build forward, not back. Build forward, Iris repeated as if trying on a jacket that might fit. It was nearly 1 by the time the room emptied of helpers. Iris curled into the corner of the sofa with a blanket thrown over her legs and stared at the snow thicken against the glass. Why didn't I see it? She asked, not to be pitied, but as a journalist interrogates her own blind spots. I trained to see power in the small print. I missed it in my own kitchen. Because they started with praise and moved the boundary a hair a week, I said. Because being loved is a drug that can be cut with obedience. Because you were busy being good at your job and thought the people at your table were eating the same truth. She turned her head and watched me with a look I'd missed for years. The one that made me feel as if we were on the same side of the desk, studying the same problem. Do you blame yourself? She asked. I blamed myself for waiting, I said. Then I remembered that you were the one who had to pick the lock. If I'd done it for you, they would have told you I stole your life. She considered that, and something in her posture unlocked. I hate that they documented that phrase, reflect on your place, until it became a reflex. We're going to give you a new place, I said. One with a key only you can use. She nodded. We fell into a quiet that felt like a porch light left on. The fire hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a vacuum cleaner sang a mournful note, Christmas night housekeeping persistent as grace. My phone vibrated against the table. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail because rules are what keep nights like this from spilling. A minute later, a text arrived from a different number I did not have in my contacts, Elaine Whitfield. Marion, this is Elaine. Please don't delete. I need to speak with you privately about Iris. I know what was done to me. I know what's being done to her. Before tomorrow, please. I stared at the screen a long second, rereading the punctuation. Elaine, the perfect hostess, the portrait on the landing that breathes. The one who never misplaces a fork. Iris watched my face change. What? Your mother-in-law, I said. She wants to meet before tomorrow. Iris's mouth tightened. Pain, confusion, a flash of loyalty learned under chandeliers. What does she think she can offer? I don't know yet, I said. And we don't go anywhere without telling Sienna. But if someone who survived Lionel's orbit wants to talk when the family lawyers are sleeping, that's usually because she knows where the light switches are. I set the phone down face down and reached for the remote to cut the fire. We needed darkness to mark the change in the day. Sleep, I said. Tomorrow we let doctors and lieutenants do the heavy lifting. The day after, maybe we decide whether to open a box named after a titan who stole fire. Iris pulled the blanket to her shoulder. Prometheus didn't steal fire, she murmured, voice already dropping toward sleep. He returned it. Then we'll return what was taken from you, I said. The snow kept falling. The city kept humming in the hushed way cities hum when they know a morning is going to matter. Morning came as if the storm had scrubbed the city clean and pinned it beneath a sheet of glass. I woke before the alarm, the kind of alertness that doesn't announce itself with panic, but with order, make coffee, check emails, review the plan I had written on hotel stationery at 2:11 a.m. Iris slept another 20 minutes deep enough that I watched the peace sit on her face like sunlight and promised myself to make room for more of it later. At 8, we were in the car, the heater performing a minor miracle, the hotel doorman saluting us as if he understood the solemnity of errands like ours. Dr. Mira Kapoor's office occupied the first floor of a narrow Cambridge brownstone with polished brass numbers and a wreath that managed to be festive without being sentimental. Inside the reception area was all warm wood and patient clocks. Sienna met us there with a nod that said we were right on time for a day that would not wait. Dr. Kapoor greeted Iris with the kind of attention that makes adults feel as safe as children. Steady eye contact, measured cadence, no wasted words. We'll speak privately, she said to me and Sienna. It will take about 2 hours. I will ask about the events of the past 24 hours, your history and your decision-making. I'll provide a written evaluation to the court by this afternoon. She paused. I do not make character judgments, I make clinical ones. Good, Iris said, already following her toward a door that closed with a whisper. Sienna and I decamped to 2 chairs by a window. Jonah arrived with a paper cup of coffee for each of us and an energy that suggested he'd already read 4 files and texted 3 sources since dawn. I'm not here as press, he said to Iris before she went in. I'm here as someone who remembers the reporter you were and believes you still are. For 2 hours, the house had our breathing. Sienna drafted a short affidavit summarizing last night's events and the police welfare check. I answered emails from Max about device provisioning and from Lieutenant Hannah Rivera confirming the time she would meet us for the retrieval. Jonah stared out the window and made a list of questions on a small reporter's pad that could have been a relic if not for the way his pencil flew. Who signed the zoning recommendation? Which shell company owns the parcel? What family office means in a city like ours? When the door opened again, Iris's face held that thoughtful exhaustion people wear after telling the truth to someone who can weigh it properly. Dr. Kapoor followed a folder in hand. I will submit a formal report to the court, she said. But I can share this. I find no evidence of cognitive impairment psychosis or inability to make decisions in her own best interest. I note the presence of coercive control indicators in the marital environment as described. I recommend ongoing therapy for recovery, not remediation. Iris exhaled in a way that retuned the room. Sienna's phone vibrated with a text. She glanced down, then up, with quiet satisfaction. Judge Albright has calendared the full hearing for the 10th day, she said. We'll have Dr. Kapoor's report in the record this afternoon. Next stop, Jonah asked. District headquarters, I said, then the house. Lieutenant Rivera looked smaller than her reputation, which is only to say she wore her competence like a second uniform. We'll drive in an unmarked vehicle, she said, sliding a manila folder across the table for Iris. This is a checklist for personal items courts typically recognize as separate property. Documents, medication devices, personal effects, inherited jewelry. We will not argue ownership of anything contested today. We will simply document refusals. She met Iris's eyes. You will not be alone in any room. If they speak to you, you may decline to respond. I will speak for you. They'll be prepared, Iris said. There will be a lawyer. There is always a lawyer, Lieutenant Rivera. Lieutenant Rivera replied. But there is not always an officer with a body-worn camera and a judge who checks her email on holidays. Today you have both. The drive out to Whitfield Hill rode the bright edge of last night's storm. Plows had carved corridors through drifts so high they made the hedges look like topiaries at attention. The Whitfield gate stood open, the kind of open that pretends to be welcoming and is really a dare. Rivera parked in front with the easy claim of a person who has parked in a lot of places other people believed they owned. Lionel met us at the door in a camel coat that may have cost more than my first car. Beside him stood a lawyer I didn't recognize, Arthur Brennan. He introduced himself, the syllables clipped to avoid any accidental warmth. Gavin was conspicuously absent, which told me the restraining order had made it through to someone who feared consequences. Lieutenant Lionel said, as if he were chairing a board meeting and had now arrived at the item he meant to defeat. We would have accommodated a request. This performance is unnecessary. A court order is a procedure, not a performance, Rivera said, her tone neutral enough to be laminated. We'll begin upstairs, Ms. Blake's bedroom. He stepped aside with a smile that never reached the eyes. Of course. The house with daylight felt even more curated than it had at night. The trees' ornaments threw calibrated glints. The carpets had that expensive silence. Upstairs in a suite larger than most apartments, Iris moved through the room like a person walking her old roots with new eyes. Closet, she said, and Rivera nodded. We collected clothes. She chose not the gowns that hung like gilded uniforms. Iris knelt by the bedside table and retrieved a passport, a birth certificate, and a small brass key she had hidden under false felt. Carved box wardrobe top shelf, she murmured. I reached and found it inside a leather-bound notebook with a broken-in spine and a fountain pen. She slid the notebook into a tote as if tucking a child beneath a blanket. We moved to what had been Gavin's office, a neat room with a view of the back lawn that had certainly hosted deals unfit for public calendars. A cabinet yielded Iris's laptop, which Max had asked us to retrieve if possible. Brennan protested. That device was purchased by the household, and Rivera lifted a hand so casually it felt like gravity. Ms. Blake's personal data, she said. Ms. Blake's device. You may copy any demonstrably household files later by subpoena if necessary. We're taking this now. In Lionel's study, this air changed temperature. The walls were paneled a shade darker than power. The desk was one of those broad boats designed to make supplicants feel smaller. Above it, a painting of a Whitfield ancestor pretended to watch over a legacy that did not include humility. On a sideboard, an oil portrait of Elaine regarded the room with a practiced serenity that suddenly felt like information we hadn't read properly. My grandmother's jewelry, Iris said, voice even. Lionel's expression cracked a millimeter. Those pieces are insured as family assets. Insured is not transferred, Sienna said from the threshold. She had joined us silently, somewhere between the stairs and the confrontation. Inherited items remain separate property absent a signed agreement. Do you have a signed agreement, Mr. Whitfield? Brennan's mouth opened and closed. We do not concede ownership at this time. You don't need to concede it, Rivera said. You just need to stand back while Ms. Blake retrieves items that are identifiable as hers. You may record the retrieval. So, are we opening the safe, or am I calling for a warrant while we stand here and admire your art? We admired Lionel's jaw for a handful of seconds. Then he pressed a hidden latch. The painting swung forward and a keypad blinked awake with the smugness of money performing a magic trick. He shielded his hands, entered the code, and opened the safe. Inside rows of organized boxes sat like well-behaved children. Iris reached for 3 and opened them just enough to verify Pearl's emerald studs, a slim gold band that still carried the heat of the woman who had worn it for 50 years before passing it down. As she closed the last box, a slim steel drive in a locked case on the desk caught her eye. So did mine. It was unmarked but for a stamped serial number and the word Electo. I felt the observation move down the chain, me, Iris, Sienna, Lionel, tracking our tracking. He stepped between the drive and Iris with the careless courtesy of a man who believes he is the only weather in the room. Finished, he asked. For now, Iris said, her voice so level it rang. We were nearly out of the study when Lionel, perhaps unable to help himself, pressed the power button on his desktop machine with a knuckle, as if he were absently checking a market curve. Iris's head tipped the way a hawk's does. His unlock pattern traced across the screen a gesture so practiced it had become muscle memory, as distinctive as a signature. Iris watched once, twice, and I knew she had it. Lionel didn't notice what he had given away. Men like him are unused to being watched by people they have written out of the story. In the bedroom again, Iris paused by the window seat and pressed on a panel that moved with the obedient resistance of something opened 1,000 times. Inside was nothing, the hole where she had once kept a decoy journal. She looked at me and smiled a small private smile. They searched, she said, not needing to add they found the wrong thing. The right one was already in her tote, between a sweater and a photograph of her grandmother taken in a field with her hair loose. Brennan kept a running tally of our boxes and bags as if itemizing would make the moment add up differently. Rivera's camera blinked its tiny red light. There was a brief exchange about a set of first edition books. We left them. There was a brief exchange about a portrait. We left that too. Pick your fights, pick your future. At the door, Lionel made one last attempt at hospitality, weaponized into threat. This spectacle will cost you, he said, quiet enough that only the 4 of us heard. We have resources you cannot imagine. I don't have to imagine them, I said. I've seen your books. His eyes cut to me a flash of calculation that briefly displaced the patrician calm. It cost him something not to ask what I meant. Pride is expensive. We walked out into cold that felt honest. Boxes slid into trunks. Rivera signed a receipt for items retrieved. Brennan signed without flourish, as if signatures might stain. When we drove away, the gates did not close behind us. Maybe the mechanism was frozen. Maybe the house liked pretending it was open. Back at the apartment Sienna had secured for us, Max had converted the dining table into a cockpit, monitors, a portable firewall, something that looked like a pelican case full of cables. He took the laptop from Iris gently, the way paramedics relieve you of someone you love. I need to say this, he said. We will stay on the right side of the law wherever there is a right side to stand on. But if someone has installed malware on your devices and used your accounts to surveil you, we are within our rights to analyze that malware and follow what it connected to. What does that mean in English? Jonah asked. It means sometimes the door you're not supposed to walk through is propped open by the person who installed your cage, Max said, already booting the machine from an external drive, and sometimes they reuse their keys. Within minutes, he had a list of old VPN profiles. The machine had known a remote desktop token last renewed 2 weeks earlier and a trusted device cookie for something blandly named BUF Family Office Client. He frowned in the way engineers frown when they have found something both predictable and appalling. 2-factor authentication, I asked. They use it, he said. But look here, remember this device was checked and the trust is good for 30 days. If we root through a tunnel that looks enough like this laptop used to look, the server may consider us a friend. Will that hold up in a court? Sienna asked, already preloading arguments. In a criminal case, probably not, Max said. In a civil matter. And as intelligence to guide lawful requests, it gives us a map. We don't need the treasure to file for a warrant, we need the coordinates. He built a sandbox that pretended to be the Iris laptop of last month, anchored it to a clean IP and tried the connection. The cursor spun. The system thought. A small rectangle of a window opened, requesting a password. Iris leaned forward. Gavin's most frequent pattern was names, she said. His parents, his brothers, his favorite yacht. Then he got lazy when he added numbers. He used years that mean something to Lionel. Try Lionel 1968 first, then Lil Whitfield said. Max tried both. The window shook no. He didn't look disappointed, only methodical. It was worth a shot, he said, but I don't actually need his password if I can catch a session token on refresh. He set a script to wait on the handshake like a fisherman watches a bobber. Meanwhile, Jonah said, you mentioned Electo. The name stamped on a drive in Lionel's study, I said. Greek again, one of the Furies. Not subtle, Sienna said. Prometheus steals fire, the Furies punish hubris. They're writing their own mythology. When men like Lionel create code names, they're often versions of mirrors, Jonah murmured, writing the word on his pad. If Electo is a drive, it's probably a rotating clone of something they don't trust the cloud with. Max's monitor chimed. He leaned in. There, he said softly, like someone watching a rare bird land. We're not in the vault, but we're in the antechamber. Directory listings only. He navigated like a careful thief who intends to testify later. Folders bloomed with names that would have looked meaningless to anyone but us, South. Harbor Pinecrest Harbor Light Civic Partners donations. A subfolder labeled Household Protocols with a last modified date of last week. He clicked Household Protocols and a set of PDFs presented themselves with the cheerfulness of poison wrapped in cellophane. Conduct expectations. New member orientation crisis. Containment in my throat went tight. Domestic harmony framework. Open the framework, Sienna said. He did. Language that mimicked HR manuals and marriage enrichment blogs compiled itself into a program that would have been laughable if it weren't so effective. Reduce outside contacts, financial centralization, communication standards codified as ban on critique, in public consequence ladders that dressed punishments in euphemism. An appendix, correctives for prospective drift. Iris did not cry. She read. I watched comprehension grind into certainty like gears finally meshing. They wrote the script, she said. And then they handed us our lines. We'll download hashes, not documents, Max said, hands already moving. We'll snapshot file name, sizes, timestamps. Enough for a subpoena to be sufficiently particularized. We're not taking anything we can't justify. The door buzzer startled all of us. It was a prosaic sound, slightly tinny, and it cut through the charged quiet like a spoon against a glass. We froze because surprises are seldom good in stories like ours. Sienna looked at me. I looked at the monitor. Iris looked at the door. The intercom crackled. A woman's voice, crisp velvet. It's Elaine. Iris closed her eyes for 1 second and opened them not with dread, but with that stranger we'd been getting to know, the woman who had spent a decade being told to become smaller and had decided post-snow to occupy her full height. Let her up, she said. Not alone, Sienna warned. Never again, I agreed, pressing the button. 3rd floor. We had 15 seconds to rearrange the room from battlefield to parlor. Max slid a privacy screen over the most incriminating part of his monitor and pushed his chair back as if he'd been doing taxes. Jonah capped his pen and put the pad in his pocket. Sienna stood where a person stands when she intends to be the first obstacle something meets if it decides to move fast. The knock was soft, the way women knock when they've been taught to apologize for needing entry. I opened the door. Elaine Whitfield looked like the portrait downstairs in Lionel's study. Same pearl stud understatement, same posture, but the eyes were different. Portrait eyes never admit weather. These had cried within the last 12 hours and then made a decision in the mirror. Thank you, she said, stepping in. She did not offer a hand. She looked at Iris as if she were asking permission to admire a work of art someone else had damaged and she intended to help repair. I'm here because if I do not speak now, I will not be permitted to speak later. By whom, Sienna asked, already knowing. By a husband who confuses control with love, Elaine said. By a family that calls cruelty tradition. By attorneys who will remind you I am loyal to the name on my driver's license and the donations on public plaques. She turned to me. And by my own silence, which has been my most obedient skill. Jonah, who has a gift for not breathing too loudly when history enters a room, edged back a step. Max didn't move at all. Elaine set a small envelope on the table between us. There are copies, she said. There always are if you have learned to survive. This set is for you. It contains the one thing Lionel fears more than law enforcement, more than journalists. What's that, I asked. Proof he taught men to be like him, she said, in case after case. Iris didn't reach for the envelope. She looked at Elaine, weighing 100 family dinners and 1,000 glances into one question. Why now? Elaine answered the way a woman answers when she has run through rehearsals all night. Because you stepped into the snow, she said. Because you stepped out again. Because I saw my younger self on a stone step and realized I was still sitting there. She took a breath that sounded like it hurt. And because before midnight tonight, many things will cease to be under anyone's control at this address or mine. The article, Jonah said softly, half to himself. Elaine's eyes flicked to him. The city will read what it has chosen not to see. But you will need more than that. You will need the map. This is a part of it. She tapped the envelope with 2 fingers and looked at Iris again. I cannot leave until I tell you one more thing. There is a backup, she said. Not the one in the study, not the one labeled in Greek, one that Lionel believes no one knows exists. If you intend to finish what you have begun, you must find it before he remembers that you could. Were Iris' asked voice steady? Elaine's smile was not a smile. Exactly where a man like Lionel would hide it, she said. In a place he is too proud to imagine a woman would ever choose to look. She stepped back then as if she had rehearsed her exit as carefully as her entrance. I have a driver waiting, she said to the room, but not to any of us specifically. When I leave, I will not have been here, but somewhere in a version of the city that is kinder than the one we built I have been. She turned to go and then at the door did the one thing I had not expected. She bowed her head slightly to Iris, a gesture older than this house and more sacred than any plaque. When the door clicked shut, no one spoke for a count of 10. Then Max's monitor chimed again, almost sheepish, token captured. We can argue about what we can use, he said, but the door is open. Sienna slid the envelope toward Iris and nodded once. Then let's learn the floor plan, she said. Midnight split the city like a seam. Jonah's story names, dates, shell companies, domestic harmony framework quoted verbatim landed on the Globe's homepage, and then everywhere else that had ever taken a Whitfield donation. The push alert lit our screens. The comment threads ignited. Phones rang in rooms we were not in. Sienna's inbox filled with statements that did not sound like statements we are reviewing. We take these allegations seriously. This is not who we are, while Max's monitors mapped a small digital stampede accounts, frozen forwarding rules, rewritten emergency board meetings scheduled before dawn. Power hates daylight and searches for a closet. By 1 a.m., the Attorney General's office had called Sienna to ask for copies of anything we could lawfully share. At 2, Lieutenant Rivera texted a single line, "Sit tight." Uniforms posted downstairs. It wasn't drama, it was a precaution born of experience. Men who have controlled rooms for decades do not go gently into accountability. We slept in intervals like parents with a feverish child. At 7, coffee. At 8, the first resignation hit the wire, a Whitfield brother stepping down to focus on family. At 8:30, a second headline, Beacon and Broad Club distances itself from longtime patron. I didn't need Sienna's raised eyebrow to hear Elaine's hint land in my mind. A place he's too proud to imagine a woman would ever choose to look. The club, I said. Sienna was already dialing. We can't just walk in, she said, but we can ask for a warrant to preserve and collect. The article and Dr. Kapoor's report establish enough smoke to justify looking for fire. By 10, Rivera had the judge's preservation order for Lionel's locker and any personal safekeeping the club maintained for members. We rode there in her unmarked sedan, the city crystalline and brittle with cold. The Beacon and Broad's facade was the kind of Boston that thinks it invented institutions. Brass plaques, stone steps, a doorman who had practiced neutral for 40 years. The manager tried charm. Rivera showed papers. We were escorted past oil portraits into a warren of corridors that smelled faintly of cedar and old leather. Locker 114 Lionel's sat waist-high in a row of identical doors. A monogrammed padlock gleamed. Rivera photographed, announced the number for the camera, and clipped the shank with a practiced snap. Inside golf shoes aligned like soldiers' boxes of sleeve-worn balls, a sweater wrapped in tissue as if it were fragile. Max, brought in as a forensic consultant, ran gloved fingers along the back panel, pressed weighted. A quarter-inch of wood gave way. Behind it, a steel envelope no larger than a paperback. Stamped on his face, Tisiphone. Another fury, Jonah murmured from behind us. Punisher of murderers in myth. And of reputations in practice, Sienna said. Rivera sealed the envelope in an evidence bag, logged time and location, and looked at me. I nodded, not because the decision was mine, but because some moments ask you to witness them with your whole name. Back at the apartment, Max built a sterile environment and imaged the drive while the original sat untouched inside chain of custody seals, the clone mounted with a little electronic sigh. There it was a mirror of Electo and more. Not just payments and protocols, but correspondence emails Lionel had backed up manually, perhaps as leverage, perhaps because men who build webs also love to admire them. Spreadsheets labeled official payments with embedded notes, PDFs of non-disclosure settlements, a folder titled Insurance with subfolders named for journalists, regulators, and competitors, and tucked like a splinter at the edge of the directory tree, household correctives last modified 2 nights ago. Max didn't open anything. He hashed fail names, captured timestamps, recorded sizes. Sienna drafted an affidavit so clean it could cut glass. Jonah stepped into the hall to call his editor, voice low excitement tempered by the ethics that separate reporters from vultures. At noon, Sienna filed a motion attaching hash inventories and chain of custody to a request for expedited discovery. At 1, the AG announced a multi-agency task force with state and federal partners. At 2, the Whitfield family released a statement dripping with piety and denial. At 3, Lionel's attorney filed a civil complaint alleging unlawful access, the legal equivalent of shouting thief while standing inside a shop you own because you never paid the builder. And at 4, Judge Albright convened our full hearing. We entered a courtroom that smelled of wood polish and consequence. Dr. Kapoor sat on a bench calm as a surgeon. Rivera in uniform. Jonah in the last row pen poised but still. Gavin at counsel table looked smaller without a house around him. He kept adjusting a tie that did not change. Sienna led with the narrowest truth the night in the snow. The screenshot from the exterior camera, courtesy of a daily security summary Miles had received, and forgotten to secure the welfare check, the temporary order already in place, the evaluation finding Iris competent. She did not mention Greek goddesses or furies. She didn't have to. The law can do a lot with one clean fact. Brennan tried theater. He talked about family tradition, about misinterpretations, about a mother's meddling. Then he made the mistake men like him make when they've never watched a jury read a woman's face. He called the incident a brief moment outside to cool down. To freeze, Judge Albright corrected mildly, not looking up from the file. In December, in a cocktail dress. She turned to Iris. Ms. Blake, do you wish to speak? Iris stood. Her voice didn't waver. Your Honor, I asked for protection to make decisions about my own life without interference or retaliation. I am not returning to that house. I am not returning to that marriage. The judge nodded once as if Iris had given the correct answer to a question the world should ask more often. The temporary order is converted to a 1-year protective order, she said. No contact, no approach, no surveillance, direct or by proxy. The court finds coercive control under the statute. Counsel will confer on a schedule for equitable division in the divorce action. The court expects discovery to be full and prompt. Any attempt to destroy or conceal evidence will be sanctioned. We are adjourned. The gavel didn't slam. It tapped the way a doctor taps a reflex and watches a leg respond. Still in that quiet sound, a door closed and another opened. Outside, microphones waited. Jonah threaded us past them with a reporter's fluency. The Whitfield statement crawled across a courthouse TV like an injured insect. We didn't stop to read it. The days that followed did not simplify, they clarified. The AG's subpoenas flew like winter birds. Directors resigned. A federal grand jury asked questions out loud that Beacon and Broadman had only ever asked in whispers. Elaine's envelope, opened with Sienna and the AG present, held board minutes from a private foundation that documented votes to fund shell-named entities no one could find on any honest map. 2 weeks later, Elaine filed for separation. Her statement to the court was not dramatic. It didn't need to be. Iris found an apartment with light that moved across the walls the way time should. She bought 2 bowls, 3 plants, a desk. She started therapy with a woman who didn't use metaphors unless asked. She let Max build her a phone that didn't answer to anyone but her. Jonah connected her with an editor at a nonprofit newsroom. They talked about housing displacement and how to report on power in ways that didn't flatten people into victims. On a Sunday, we carried boxes up 3 flights of creaking stairs. At the top, winded and laughing, we stood in the echo of new rooms. Iris set a key in my palm. For emergencies, she said. I'll try not to use it, I said. She looked at the window at the city, at a future that didn't require permission. I thought place was a leash, she said. Turns out it's a door you can learn to unlock. Prometheus didn't steal fire, I reminded her. He returned it. And you returned mine, she said. No, I said, because truth matters, especially at thresholds. You stepped into the snow and then you stood up. We just held the light. We drank tea sitting on the floor backs, against boxes, the heat clanking in the radiators like a small band tuning. Outside, what was left of the winter glittered without menace. Inside, the silence was new, not the curated quiet of a house that punishes sound, but the kind of quiet that invites it. When I left, I paused at the door, turned, and saw my daughter not as a person the Whitfields had tried to resize, but as the measure she had always been. She raised the mug in a mock salute. See you tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, I agreed, and stepped into a hallway that smelled of dust and paint and other people's dinner's life. In other words, knowing that when the door clicked behind me, it closed on something that would not be coming back. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.